Welcome to 99 zu 1. Herzlich willkommen zu 99 zu 1. I will start today speaking a little bit of German because of a special occasion, and then we'll come back to our English talk with Torkil Lausens about global perspective. And this is also what I want to explain now, as this book that we are going to be talking about is going to be published in German. Also, heute reden wir über dieses Buch The Global Perspective von Torkil Lausens, Reflections on Imperialism and Resistance. Dieses Buch wurde herausgegeben vom Lower Class Magazine und gedruckt und veröffentlicht vom Unserer Verlag und ist jetzt verfügbar. Sieht im Endeffekt genauso aus wie dieses Buch. Mein deutsches Exemplar ist noch auf dem Weg. In diesem Interview haben wir Torkil selbst mit dabei, so dass wir das Ganze auf Englisch machen werden. Das Buch ist auf jeden Fall empfehlenswert. Schaut mal rein. Wie gesagt, das Lower Class Magazine hat es herausgegeben beim Unserer Verlag. Und damit switche ich jetzt wieder auf Englisch. And coming back to English, let's start our interview. And for that, we have our guest here, Torkil Lausens. I'll get him into the room. Torkil, hello. Welcome to 99 zu 1.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me for this talk.
It's an honor to have you here. Let me give a short introduction for anybody who might not know Torkil, and then we'll get right into the questions. So Torkil is a long-time anti-imperialist activist and writer. He's living in Denmark. From 1970 to 1989, he was a full-time member of a communist anti-imperialist group supporting the Third World liberation movements by both legal and illegal means. He worked occasionally as a glass factory worker, mail carrier, laboratory worker in order to be able to stay on the dole. And in connection with support work, he traveled Lebanon, Syria, Zimbabwe, South Africa, the Philippines, Mexico. In the 1990s, he was actually incarcerated, and he was then involved in prison activism and received a master's degree in political science also. So I mean, you lived quite. Maybe I'll start with a personal question, if you allow. You lived quite a remarkable life of activism. I mean, from very early on, and also with very high stakes. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Maybe flesh out this intro that I just gave a little bit. How did you get radicalized, and what was your political activist career? What did it look like?
No, it's not that special, because I was part of the '68 generation, and all this with music and the Vietnam War. I started with music with Bob Dylan and things like that, and then I moved into politics with the resistance against the Vietnam War, and also I was interested in all the other liberation movement at the time. It was the highlight of anti-imperialist movements in the world, but which actually tuned me on was a schoolmate. I was in a boarding school, and a schoolmate of mine was much more into politics than I was, and he introduced me to a communist group called Communist Working Circles, and I was very impressed by them, because they took their work very seriously. There was a connection between what they said and actually what they did. I remember the first action I had with them was a demonstration against a movie called The Green Berets with John Wayne. The Green Berets was a military regiment in Vietnam, and John Wayne was the soldier in this, and it was promoting the U.S. war in Vietnam, and this group, they didn't want to protest against this movie being showed in the cinema. They want to stop it, so they went in with stink bombs, and they crashed this theater, and they had to take the movie off the screen, and it was not longer screened. So there was this they took it serious. And there was also at the same time there was demonstration against the World Bank in Copenhagen, and they were not demonstrating against the World Bank. They wanted to stop this conference, attacking the conference center, attacking the delegates where they lived in hotels and in restaurants where they eat. So they were very, in that way, they were radical, and they took politics serious. And this appealed very much to me.
So you already kind of introduced the KAK, the Communist Working Circle, translated in English. Then there was another organization that is also quite prominent in your book, and it is called the MKA. Can you give us a context about that? So how these maybe relate to each other even?
It's more or less the same people, but there was a split. The Communist Working Circle was founded in 1964 as the first Maoist group actually in Europe, and it started out with support to the Vietnam War, and it has this double strategy. On one side, it wanted to support the liberation movements in the third world because they could cut off the pipelines of imperialism, and in that way create a revolutionary situation in our part of the world also. But in that work, in that support work, it was also a kind of organization building and education. We wanted to learn different kinds of skills being useful when the revolution would appear in Europe. So it has this double perspective of both supporting the third world and building a kind of a vanguard organization in Denmark. The reason why there's two organizations is because there was a split in 1978, but it's not important, I think, for the book and for this talk.
Right. So maybe then let's get to the book. The book again is called The Global Perspective: Reflections on Imperialism and Resistance. It was actually already published 4 years ago. It took a while to be translated into German. Can you maybe give us an intro? Why did you write this book? What was your aim, or whom did you try to address with this book?
Well, it's an update of a book I penned in 1982 about imperialism and the strategy against imperialism, and it was a book that I penned for this group, Communist Working Circle. It was a collective work, but I penned it, and this nearly 40 years later, I think I wanted to update this book and take a look on imperialism again, because many things had changed since the 80s. But I also wanted to have this perspective of it's not just an academic book, but it's a book which talk about strategy and anti-imperialism and what to do. So it's a book which I write for activists mainly.
Yeah, awesome. So in your book, let's get a little bit to the content of the book. So in your book, of course, you already mentioned it. Your main focus is imperialism, and you actually try to outline your understanding and your approach to imperialism and capitalism in this book. And the result is really like some kind of synthesis or amalgamate of various different concepts. You start with Marx, Engels, Lenin, but also then coming to the neo-Marxists, Baron Sweezy, Frank, Wallerstein, Samir Amin, and even John Smith, which is more recent, right? Interestingly, I'm doing myself on the podcast, I'm doing a little bit of a series on imperialism, so I'm also kind of already starting to give some presentations on all these people and those concepts. But for the English-speaking people that follow us, that might not have the grasp of all these things, let's maybe try to talk a little bit about these terms. I think one very important term that comes up in the book and also in most of these researchers' work is the term labor aristocracy. Can you tell us what that means?
Well, it's a concept of Lenin, which he made in his struggle against social democracy in the Second International back in 1914, 1913, around the beginning of the First World War. Yeah. And he wanted to explain how this reformism of the social democracy has gone into the socialist movement. And his explanation was that there had developed a labor aristocracy within the socialist movement, a rather thin layer of workers who got benefits from imperialism, and that corrupted them in this way, and created this labor aristocracy, which was the mass base of social democracy. Yeah? And an example of the significance was that the Social Democrats voted for war bonds, voted for supporting their national governments going into the First World War. But actually, okay. I think if we are talking a little about labor aristocracy, recently one German and one Austrian academic called Markus Wissen and Brandt have introduced a concept which is called imperial mode of living, which is related to this labor aristocracy. And they said that imperialism has made it possible for Europeans or a significant part of Europeans, even in the working class, to have an imperial mode of living. They have cars, they have holidays to Spain and Greece, they have all kinds of electronic devices, and they have a huge consumption of clothes and so on and so on. And we can only consume in this way because of the rest of the world does not consume in this way. So it has also a kind of ecological perspective. But what is very different, and I think interesting in terms of imperial mode of living, that is, it's a more a sociological explanation. You know, people are kind of grown up with this imperial living from childhood and engulfed in this way of consumption, while Lenin is more a moral conception, which about it's more corrupted and so on. So I think this imperial mode of living supplement, it's very good from how the labor aristocracy functions today.
Right, where today doesn't need an active kind of bribe anymore to convince people to stick to their lives.
It's simply a part of the way we live and how the world look at. People are very aware, of course, that they are getting cheap clothes because they are produced by low-wage labor. They are aware that they get a cheap iPhone because it's produced by low wage in China and so on. But it's not something which bothers them. It's how the world functions.
Right. Then there is another concept. It's a concept from the KAK. I'm calling that now in English, probably. And that is the concept that's related to that. It's called the parasite state. What is the parasite state?
Yeah, we have, I think, already talked about it, but the original concept of the parasite state is from an Englishman called Hobson. He was also actually the person who coined the concept imperialism in 1901. I think so. He coined the concept of imperialism, but also parasite state. He thought that England, specifically the south coast of England, was a kind of a parasite state or a parasite region where there was no proper working class more, but it was only servants and holiday and so on. And it was possible because of English colonialism, mainly in India, and he was very critical against this. And Lenin picked this up, and he took the concept of imperialism and the concept of parasite state actually from Hobson. He read Hobson's book before he wrote his own book, Imperialism at the Highest State of Capitalism. So this is the concept of parasite state.
Okay, I'm sorry that we are going through some of the terms, but I think it's important, as I said, your view really is like a synthesis of all of these ideas. One that is interesting, I think, is to talk about the so-called unequal exchange. What is that?
Well, our group at the time, we had three kinds of work. We have the legal work, we have the unlegal work, and then we have studies. And the studies were very important for us because we wanted that our practice have a very solid foundation in terms of how the world actually functioned and how the world actually looked. And we started out with Lenin and his concept of imperialism. And then we found that the working class in Denmark was not very interested in socialism. They were interested in higher wage and better living conditions, but they were not interested in socialism, and they didn't support the anti-imperialist struggle. And our explanation was that it was a labor aristocracy, and Denmark was a parasite state. And then we wanted to give it an economic foundation also. So we tried to update Lenin's figures and Lenin's facts about how big was the transfer from the exploited country to the imperialist center. And Lenin's main explanation was that it was super profits back from investment in the colonialism in the colonial areas. It was super profit, and we tried to calculate how high was this profit, and we found that it could not explain the imperial mode of living. The figures was not high enough, so it could explain. And then at that time, it was back in the mid-70s, there was a huge number of new theories on imperialism coming. Andre Günther Frank, Samir Amin, and Wallerstein, and also this Aguirre Emmanuel. And he coined the concept of unequal exchange. And it was a critique of an old classic economic called Ricardo. And Ricardo, he said that if you do what you are best at in different countries, everybody will. It's a win-win situation. Portugal is best of producing port wine, and England is best of producing clothes. And when they exchange port wine for clothes, they both win. But Emmanuel was critical of he said that everyone is not winning. Someone is losing and someone is gaining. So when there is trade between the imperialist countries and the exploited countries, the rich countries win. And what is behind it is the difference in the level of wage, actually. If when China exchange goods with the US, there is a difference in wage, say 1 to 15 or something. And when they exchange goods, there's a huge value is transferred to the rich country in form of cheap prices, high profit for Apple, but also cheap prices for the consumers of the iPhone, or the consumers for a T-shirt, or the consumers for coffee, or the consumers for bananas, or the consumers for blah blah blah. So in this way, the amount, this could explain actually the imperial mode of living in our part of the world. The value transfer was big enough to explain that.
I mean, in the book, you already outline how you try to, like you already spoke about this, how you actually try to calculate how much, or other people also did that, how much value actually was flowing from the south to the north. How is it, like, how can you calculate something like this? Is it possible to explain this shortly? How does this work?
Oh, there are different methods, of course. But one simple method is that you can try to calculate an average world level of wage, and which is something between $1 in the hour and $20 in the hour. So you calculate, and you can say how many people are working for this wage and how many people are working for. So you can estimate a kind of global average wage, and then you can go into and then you have this global average wage, and then you can go into trade statistic and say how much is the worth of value going from the rich countries to the poor countries, and from the poor countries to the rich countries, and then you can make this calculation of this export at the different wage level. So you can estimate if they are trading by this average wage level, what would the value of this trade be, and compare it to the actual figures, and you can see how much they lose actually. But there are also other very complicated methods but this is one method actually. But there are other, and even more precise. And when we tried to calculate it, it was very difficult because it's a lot of figures, and there was no computer. We didn't have computers at the time, and we had to go to the library, go to the books, and find all the. Now you can take the figures down from the internet, and you can use a computer to calculate. So it's much more simple now, and people are still trying to calculate it. I have seen that recently one called Hinkle and Sullivan has made a calculation of the what the global South have lost from 1960 to 2018, and they have it's a figure of $153 trillion is the amount. So it's difficult to relate to such a huge
of course, that's humongous.
But everybody, I think we can feel. We know that if you had to produce an iPhone in Europe, then you have to you have the wage, the labor wage would be much higher, and the cost of the. There's also been very precise calculation of what would the production price of an iPhone be if it was produced in the US or produced in Germany, and what is the price when it's produced in China? And again, it would cost. It's not the double. It was the 5 double or the 10 double. The cost would be, and it's same for a lot of other products. So we have a kind of I think a feeling of the significance of this unequal exchange.
Yeah, excellent. Some of these methods, how to calculate this, are also outlined in your book. So anybody that is interested should definitely get that. So let's come to the next topic, and then we're close to asking you the big question, what imperialism is for you. But let's talk first about world systems theory. That would be the next step in the theorizing of imperialism at some point. What is that?
Well, it's actually connected to what I will call the significance of the global perspective, because the global perspective is very important for me, because it's the only right perspective when you look at capitalism. And world system theory was made by the late Immanuel Wallerstein. He died a couple of years ago, and he explained that the process of creating capitalism and creating a world system is the same. It started with Columbus, and it goes over the Viennese states and Dutch trade capitalism and the English industrial capitalism and so on. So in these stages, capitalism was developed. And at the same time, it was a process of uniting the world into one system. And capitalism would not have been possible without the primitive accumulation of colonialism, because it was the foundation, the gold coming out from Latin America, the plunder, the exploiting of Latin America, the silver and the gold coming from Latin America in the Spanish ships was a very important part of starting the accumulation process and starting capitalist production. So the world system is the creation of one system which functions as a system. So capitalism is born as a global system, and it has always functioned as a global system. And colonialism and imperialism have always been part of capitalism. You cannot separate these concepts. So it's the world. It's a system of national states which is divided into a center state, semi-periphery state, and periphery state, and they supplement each other and function as a whole. This is the world system theory.
Right, and of course, world system theory is like a big catalog of studies there, and how they characterize which country belongs to the semi-periphery and to the periphery. Some of the stuff is also contested. So there is an ongoing debate also there. But one interesting question, maybe because you already talked about, capitalism from its beginning is basically global, or aspired to be global, and was encroaching on global dimensions. What then is specifically the role of the state or the nation state? How central is the state to all these concepts to understand also imperialism?
Yeah, well, first of all, the national state is very closely linked to capitalism. This kind of state we have today is very close to linked to the development of capitalism. And on one hand, capitalism hates states because it's trying to regulate state, and it says that it's regulating trade, and it's putting different kinds of labor laws, and the state also takes some tax and so on. So on one hand, capitalism hates state, but on the other hand, it needs the states. It needs the state because else they will go into all kinds of fights. The state has to have security and uphold order, but also the state needs to regulate capitalism to function also, because or else capitalism would be an express train on 50 meters of rail. So it needs the state to do this, and it also needs the state to actually the capital itself cannot be imperialist. They can in the economic way, but they need the state to uphold the imperialist system. It needs the army and the capacity of the state to secure the borders and to secure the imperialist system. So they need the state very much. I must say that I was one which was very much impressed by Tony Negri and Hart's book Empire, in which was written at the height of neoliberalism, when we saw, instead of the state institutions, we saw transnational institutions beginning to regulate the global economy. But I think that they forgot that there is some contradiction in neoliberalism, and the state come back and made a return and kind of revenge, because people was getting fed up with the neoliberalism and turned to the state again and asked them to put on some dikes and trying to regulate this global capitalism. So in that way, the state have returned as a very important factor in global politics.
Yeah, I would even say I also read Negri's book. It's called Empire in the 21st Century or something like this, right?
Yeah.
And I always found it interesting that, I mean, yes, transnational corporations and organizations become more central to the management of the global economy and also even military. But then it was always clear to me that that's not where the power resides, that the actual power, and by power, I mean really power over people, resides in those nation states, right? And you could very well see this, especially in the US, that they might agree in terms of a contract to, not invade countries like they did in 2003, for example, or 2004, 2002. But when it comes to their interest, this is nothing more than that. It's just a contract. There's no real power standing over them to tell them not to do that. So in the end, I always was skeptical of this idea that the nation state becomes more irrelevant. I would agree to that.
And it's always also related to the discussion of, is there a global bourgeoisie or is there national bourgeoisie? So it's another. It's the same discussion in another way. Yeah.
All right. Then let's maybe try to put a tag on this. You speak in your book about your approach to imperialism, and as I said, it feeds from all of these concepts. So can you then maybe try to explain what is imperialism, and what is your view? What, in your view, should be the role of anti-imperialism in all this?
Well, for me, imperialism is first of all an economic concept. It is economic exploitation by the core countries, the imperialist countries of the poor countries in the world. So it has an economic dimension, and but it also, of course, has a political dimension, because the imperialist state has to uphold their power by political and military force. So it's both an economic and a political phenomenon, but basically it's an economic phenomenon. Yeah.
And then let's talk a little bit about anti-imperialism. So, and this may be a little bit of a challenging question up first, but let's ask it like this: why do we even need anti-imperialism? Why is it not enough to be anti-capitalist, for example? So I would, for example, propose that Marx Capital lays out the foundations for these kind of economic laws, like you were just talking about, to understanding where all these pressures and all these compulsions to act in certain ways come from. And then, of course, this expresses itself in various forms that might look different today than they looked 100 years ago. Why is it that we need this particular approach of saying I'm against imperialism when we can say we are against capitalism, and that should include that, no?
For me, it's because when you strike against the imperialism, you strike at the heart of capitalism, and I will explain you why. Going back to this statement that imperialism is capitalism need imperialism. Why does it need imperialism? Because there is this basic contradiction in capitalism, that there is an imbalance between the size of production and the size of the consumption. That the production grows and grows and grows, but because capital needs profit to continue this escalation, then the consumption power which this production produce is not big enough to buy the products. There is also there is always overproduction or underconsumption. If you can look at it at two ways. So to develop capitalism and to continue capitalism, they need something extra. They need something extra in the consumption power, and they need something extra in the profits to go on. And they get this from imperialism by super exploitation of the proletariat in the global south. They both get higher profit, but it also ends up as higher consumption power because of cheaper products, and because of the working class in the center gets some part of the profit in terms of taxes. So in that way, that imperialism functions as the savior of capitalism. So therefore, if we can, and then we come to why anti-imperialism. It's because of the motivation in the global south for changing that mechanism. It's much greater than it is in the capitalist center. Basically, as long as this as capitalism functions the way as it does today, it's in the interest of the working class in the imperialist center to continue this way of modus operating. but they have an objective interest in the global south, in stopping imperialism. Yeah. So that's why I think that the imperialist struggle is very important.
So maybe yes, sorry.
Yeah,
go ahead,
and also you can see from you have class struggles, the struggle between the workers and the capitalists. But in imperialism, this class struggle has also a national dimension between exploiting nation and extinct nations. So you have this. It's another dimension of class struggle on the national level. It's not just workers against capital. There's other kinds of international class struggle.
So would I characterize this idea correctly if I said that it's a combination of a crisis theory that is based on underconsumption and a revolutionary theory that is based on an immiseration thesis? So when it gets worse for people, they're more likely to rise up. And these two things are the reason, basically combined, why we should be anti-imperialist, because that would be basically our strategy against capitalism.
Yeah, it's the I like it better. It's to what's defined a revolutionary situation, and why does people want change, and why does people want a socialism, and this is related to how they live. It's not just a kind of wish. It's related to how you live, and you can see all revolutions have always been in terms of huge crisis, political crisis and economic crisis. Yeah.
You know, the only thing that I sometimes struggle with when thinking about that, because of course this is I totally see this argument. I'm Palestinian myself, so I see also some revolutionary potential in Palestine, for example, right? At least there was a big one decades ago. But the thing that always where I don't have an answer to yet is the following question. I am in Germany. I live pretty well. Let's say you are in Denmark now. You are one of the people that lives in the global north too. But still, you managed, or I managed, to reach a certain kind of consciousness that makes us wish to remove capitalism or to overcome it and install something new. And I'm wondering if we were able to do that, why shouldn't the rest of the population be able to do that? Because I can tell you, for me at least, it was not because I was in such a bad situation, right? I was not. I was in a pretty comfortable situation, to be honest. It was more like an intellectual feat that I had, where I heard arguments and I realized, okay, yeah, that's how the world works, and we should approach it this way.
I think that there are always some 1 to 5% which are out of touch with it. But if you take the majority in Germany, or the majority in Denmark, or the majority in many countries, they are not. But there are also all kinds of strange, specific personal reasons why people doesn't react to their class background, but so there's also for me, I think it was kind of bad consciousness that I was living so good, and I was, we did a lot of travel in our organizations. At that time, I was traveling in Africa and the Middle East and all this country, and I saw how they lived, and I get in personal contact with people in the liberation struggle and connected to them. So I felt I have some kind of a personal responsibility to help them. So it was this kind of, you can call it bad consciousness, not personal relations, which very much was a driver in my activism. But I think that I often caught myself have some gut reactions and bourgeois and European gut reactions because of the way I live, and so it's just a lot of it is just the talk, and a lot of it is punctual actions, because in my main living I'm living like a petit bourgeois, and this is. Neoliberalism is going into our blood, the way we think and the way we act when we act unconscious. I think it's capitalism and imperialism is in our blood and our vein. We cannot. So in that way, I don't think I'm saved or I'm a revolutionary, but I have some conscious about that it's not right.
Okay, I mean, then maybe let's stick to that topic for a second, because I mean, in the 60s, 70s, it's quite well known, and there were also a lot of big figures and people, for example, in the African anti-colonial movements and all over the world, really. And China was also seen as, and of course, Vietnam, Korea, etc.
Yeah.
We had this idea or this feeling something is happening there in the so-called third world, and that's what could spark that revolution. So why didn't those revolutions happen in the third world then? I mean, the immiseration was there. They could have gotten there. There was also a lot of communist education, let's say, so they had contact to these kind of teachings. So why did they fail, at least even when they took power, when there was a revolution, they failed to install a socialist transformation? And the anti-imperialism that was envisioned back then actually turned to some kind of, comprador bourgeoisie taking over. Was there? Do you think there was an error in our analysis here, or did something new happen that we didn't see coming?
Something new was happening, but let me try to explain it. Well, first of all, I think that it's not. There was a kind of crisis in the capitalism. It's in what you can call the long 60s. I will say from the beginning of the 60s up till about 75. I would say that the main contradiction in the world was between this kind of socialist motivated liberation movements in the third world and US imperialism. It was the most important contradiction in the world, I would say from 65 at least to 63, 64. You had around 50 strong liberation movements all around the world, which had socialist revolution on the agenda. And they were progressing, and actually many of them in this anti-colonial struggle attended national liberations. There were a few which didn't. The Palestine didn't. It's kind of lacking behind. It's still a colonial. You have West Sahara, but more or less the rest got national liberation. But it turns out much harder to go from national liberation to economic liberation. We have this strategy that when they get national liberation, they would go on to have kind of economic liberation. They would construct different kinds of socialism. They would cut the pipelines of imperialism and blah, blah, blah. And then we would have a continuation of the world. But it didn't happen. And it was not because they were corrupted. It was not because I think they made. I think they were honest socialists. They wanted to go on with this transformation, but they were not capable of doing it because they were. First of all, most of their economy was very underdeveloped and very weak by colonialism, and they could not. To develop socialism, they have to develop their productive forces. They have to get new technology. To do this, they have to have capital. How could they get capital? only by continuing to export their raw materials and their coffee and their things. So they were kind of interlocked in this. The capitalist world was still very strong, and they were very extremely weak economies and weak state within a dominating capitalist world. Capitalism was not finished. Socialism come when capitalism cannot develop the productive forces anymore because of problems in the mode of production and so on. But capitalism was not run out. It played the card of neoliberalism. It played the card of capitalist globalization. It still has this spatial fix of outsourcing productions to low-wage labor in mainly in China and East Asia. So it was not finished. So this, I think, was the main reason why they did not succeed. You saw it very clearly in South Africa. Defeated Tide regime. They carried on with a neoliberal policy. Mandela carried on, and his party carried on with neoliberalism. And it was because in 1990 you could not imagine that it was impossible for South Africa to start as a socialist transformation of the economy, both in economic terms and the political terms, but because it was the heyday of neoliberalism, and socialism was defeated in the Soviet Union and in East Europe and everywhere, and then all the liberation movement backed off of their socialist project. Yeah.
No, I definitely see that. Also, one must say that, of course, if you look at particular cases, the reasons for certain movements failing were also different. They were not all the same everywhere. Yeah. But it is striking.
Yeah, you can go into specific analysis. Why did it happen in Mozambique? Why didn't it happen in Vietnam? Why did it happen in China and so on? There's a lot of specific reasons, but I think this is the general framework.
No, because it's striking that it has been a general development, so there should be some general motors behind that. Okay, let's talk a little.
I think we have to see the transitions from capitalism to socialism as a long process running over 200 years. So all these attempts is not false. It's not corrupted people. It's not stupid people. It's just what is possible on different times in this transition period. And all these attempts, all these revolutions, they had an impact on capitalism. Of course, capitalism assimilated certain things. It changed its direction. It had to do this and this again. But again, we have to see it as a long transition process. Mainly that then a chain of failed socialist projects.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about today, and before we maybe come to a close, to talk a little bit about the practice and the activism that you said the book is actually written towards that. So let's have that in the end. But I would like to talk a little bit about today. So first thing that in your analysis of imperialism you outline is that the new form of global economy has indeed changed quite a bit. And that is currently based on quite huge and very intricate, complex global supply chains. Can you explain how this works and what would be the consequences of an understanding of imperialism or anti-imperialism, and also maybe class analysis? What would be the consequences of understanding that?
Yes, I think what is most important is that before you had international like global investment and you have global trade. Now you have global production. That the production of an automobile or the production of anything industrial product is often a chain of production sites located many places in the world. It started out maybe in design and research and development in the US or in Europe, and then they outsource the actual production, the manual production to low wage countries, and maybe in many different places. I think there is. If you produce a car, the different components is maybe produced in 40 or 50 different countries, and then they are assembled also in different countries. So we have this globalized production. Clearly, in a way where you located the different kinds, where the resources are best, where are the best infrastructure, where are the lowest wages, where are the people who know about it. So this is a very interesting development, and also I think what is very interesting now is that on one side you have established this kind of economic globalized production, and on the other hand we are now seeing that the politics this of the globalized management are falling apart. All the institutions which were built, the World Trade Organizations, the World Bank, the IMF, and all this kind of the EU and NAFTA, and all this kind of markets which were established during neoliberalism, they are coming under pressure. It's like we are that the US is beginning to destroy actually the political framework of neoliberalism, and it's a very huge problem. Maybe now in a few years we will see a divided world market. We see trade wars, we see all kinds of sanctions, and they are destroying this political framework of this global production change. And this is, of course, a huge problem for capitalism, that they have this hardware they have made of this production network. And now the US is beginning to destroy the political framework of this market, and are destroying this world market which have earned them so well for 50 years. So it's a kind of self-destruction of capitalism which we are in now, which are a very serious problem for capitalism, I think.
One topic you don't talk about in your book, because obviously that book is a little bit older, is actually the Ukraine crisis. And I think this fits pretty neatly to what you were just describing. Can you tell us how you understand the current crisis, what's happening there, and how is this related to imperialism from either side, globally or whatever?
I see the main contradiction to today is the declining of U.S. hegemony and the rise of China. And what is behind that is that the U.S. can no longer in the economic way compete with China. China has developed the technology and the ability to produce industrial products cheaper and at least as good as the US. So US cannot compete with China in the economic way anymore. So they have to compete with them in the political and military way, because they are still in this area stronger than China and stronger than the rest of the world. So I think this is the main contradiction. And the specific struggle with Ukraine is actually, and the proxy war with Ukraine is something which is a diversion of this, but it is also connected to this crisis. The specific crisis with Ukraine is, about the NATO, and that Russia is afraid that NATO would be too strong to put up rockets actually in Ukraine, which can match and can very easily overpower the Russian Federation. It's important, I think, to see that NATO's budget on military is 17 times higher than the Russian, 17 times higher. They are so much stronger than Russia in terms of conventional military power. Very, very much. The only terms when they are more or less equal is on the nuclear weapons. So I think so. It's a very dangerous situation that they are pressing Russia on the conventional because they're so much stronger. So what they actually want, I think, is a change in Russia back to a Yeltsin regime. Maybe this is what they want: a regime turn in Russia, because and then they could unite with Russia against China to pressure China for a regime change. Also, they know that they cannot military conquer China and go into a military confrontation with China. What they want with China is also they wish a regime change in China. The way to get rid of the communist regime, or to get the kind of Yeltsin also in place in China. But both scenarios, I think, they are not very. I don't think they will succeed in these scenarios. But this is the only option which they have, because they cannot win on the economic front, so they have to go into the political and military front. So it's a very dangerous situation, I think, because they will rely on military terms rather than the others. And this is poison. This international situation is poison for everything. You will not get any progress in the ecological and climate question as long as we have this huge confrontation in the world. We will not see any progress in this world. And it's also, this confrontation is of course also behind the economic crisis which is developing in Europe and in America. So if the Third World Liberation Movement could not cut the pipelines of imperialism, I actually think that capitalism itself is now, or America now itself, actually cutting these pipelines of imperialism because they cannot compete anymore. So we are looking at a long economic crisis we are going into a very dramatic and interesting period in the history in the coming years. I think it's the end game for capitalism. I don't think it will survive this century.
Well, that could be a good thing. That could also end up really, really badly. So let's hope that it's the good thing, and let's work for that. Maybe one last word, because you You touched that for a moment there, and in your book you actually have a complaint about also communist movements and thinkers not taking this into account enough, the factor ecology. So can you speak a little bit about that? Why do you think this is so important, especially for anti-imperialists to take into account?
First of all, ecology also has unequal exchange also has an ecology side of it, because we don't. There's unequal exchanges in value, but there's also an unequal exchange in the same way in ecology, because we are not. We are also exporting polluting industry, and we are exporting waste to the third world to avoid our problems at the home. But of course, ecology is the basic for all human activities. So if we don't solve that problem within this century, it's not only a question of class struggle, but it's a question of humanity. But I think it's in the front of I think, for instance, that China is taking it actually seriously.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about practice. And that would maybe be then my last three questions. Maybe let's talk a little bit about the outlooks and perspectives for a revolution, because that's, ultimately that's what we will need. What would be a communist struggle up against? What do we have to do, or what do we have to fight in order to transcend capitalism and imperialism? What will we face?
Well, it depends on who we are. I think we have to differentiate between what we have to do or what is going on in the capitalist center, in the global south in general, and I will also separately think about what is going on in countries like China, Vietnam, and Cuba, because there are different tasks and different problematic in each of these sections of the world. I think I will say if we start with China, which I think is actually of huge importance for the future, I think China is very important. In which way is it going? Or is it going to develop some kind of socialism with Chinese characteristic? And I think when I have studied China for the last 10 years, I think that China is sliding to the left very fast. In terms of delinking from imperialism, more or less voluntary. The Chinese wages have gone up 3 times. The working wage in China have raised 3 times, 300%, which is a huge decline in the unequal exchange between China and the global north. So I think, and then also the race, the development of the agriculture in China, and the development also in other aspects of the Chinese society, also in how they discuss politics. If you see what is coming out from the Chinese universities of discussion and China and Marxism, it's actually very interesting, and maybe there's a lot of discussions going on. I've never seen that in the 50 years I have looked at the political discussions in China, they are much more differences and interesting discussions going on. The struggle in China is very important. It could be reflected in within the Communist Party, this class struggle, and then there could also be movements against the Communist parties. But if we are looking at the movements against the Communist parties, we have to be pretty sure that they are from the left and not some kind of liberal or neoliberal opposition. I think which it was in Hong Kong. It was not a left-wing opposition against China. It was a kind of neoliberal and liberal opposition against China. So China, in the rest of the global South, I think we will see a continuations of workers' struggle. We can see it very strongly in South Africa. I'm very optimistic on what's going in South Africa, and we can see news. I think also we can see it in Iran. We can see a new left-wing revolution is probably. We can see the whole of Latin America also. There's a strong tendency to go in left-wing. So there's a lot of interesting things going in, both in China and in the global South. It's more, I think it's and a lot of people in Europe are depressed and they are blurred and things. But I'm optimistic. It's only here that we are not very optimistic. I think the majority of the world. I think that. The progressive forces are going forward.
Well, now you already answered my two further questions. So one question would have been about what strategies should we pursue, and the last question would have been if you see any openings and anything to give you hope in these supposedly rather bleak times. So if there is anything you want to add to that, or say a couple of last words. If not, I would have reached the end of my script.
Yeah, but I maybe say a little about the situation here in Europe and in maybe also in the Western. I think the most important task for the few left people, and I think it's possible to mobilize. In Denmark, I will say between 1% and 5%, and in Germany, I will say it's larger. I will say that you can mobilize an anti-imperialist movement in Germany if you are lucky. At the moment, I will say up to 10%. I think the situation in Germany it have always been more progressive than in the Scandinavian countries. The Scandinavian countries is very parasite, because we have this huge, very strong welfare state, and it's in Germany and France and Spain and so on. It's different, and I think the potential is bigger there. And I think the main point is that to avoid imperialist war and war in general, I think it's very, very, very high on the agenda, because it's like the ecological problem. It's where we are going into this kind of wars. It's not a class problem. It's a human problem, and we can mobilize a lot more than the left on this anti-war agenda at the moment here in Denmark. Even the left-wing parties, former communists, they are pro-NATO now, because they have this stomach feeling that it's NATO which protect their freedom and their imperial way of living. It's NATO which so it's Denmark and Scandinavian. It's completely pro-NATO, and I think it's different in a bit different in Germany and in France and and Spain, it's not that strong. So I think the struggle for peace and the struggle against imperialist war is extremely important in these times. Yeah. And then of course, yes.
No, please go ahead.
No, and then again, also support to the anti-imperialist movements in the third world and laborers in the third world, and not. I don't think we should be uncritical towards China, but we should not swallow all kinds of propaganda against China. And I would think that it's important that you go into the source yourself. Try to look at the speech Xi Jinping made at the last Congress, the 20 Congress. Read it yourself instead of just swallowing up what the media tell about it. It's actually a very sensible man who is talking there. So I think that the propaganda apparatus runs very, very strong at the moment. I think in the media, and then I think that's also still the anti-fascist and the anti-racist struggle. Mm-hmm. And this would also, I think, be important in America, because in the US, because America is it's falling apart political at the moment. It's a very, very strange countries where politics and Netflix and video games are mixing up in the people's head instead of reality and what is going out in the world. They have a strange perception of half fiction and half facts. It's a very, very, and it's dangerous when you have this kind of conscious in people's mind. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to say there. I think for probably more than one episode, we could talk about these kind of strategies and levers to push. But that's a good overview. So I want to hold this up into the camera again. The book is called The Global Perspective. In German, it's called Die globale Perspektive. It is from Torkil Lausen. In German, if you want to read it, it comes in the Unequal Verlag, herausgegeben, published and edited by Lower Class magazine. And this English version here is actually published by Kersplebedeb. Did I say that correctly? Yeah, sorry for that. Yeah, definitely a great book, a great overview, going also a lot into depth. I mean, you can see it's also not a thin read, so please check that out. Torkil, it was a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for taking so much time to talk to us, and maybe have you on soon again to talk about something else.
Yeah, I have a new book coming up.
Oh yeah, okay, then I'll get in touch with you once this is out. Thanks, Torkil. Yeah. See you soon. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Leute, wir brauchen eure Hilfe. Wenn euch dieses Video gefallen hat, klickt auf Like, abonniert den Kanal und vergesst nicht, das Glöckchen zu drücken, damit ihr benachrichtigt werdet, wenn wir neuen Content droppen.
Außerdem solltet ihr uns überall folgen, wo wir verfügbar sind. Das ist Facebook, Instagram, Twitter und Twitch. Und wenn wir irgendwelche Ankündigungen machen oder Posts, dann shared, was das Zeug hält. Gebt uns all eure Liebe.
Wir haben mittlerweile ziemlich signifikante Kosten. Wenn ihr es euch irgendwie leisten könnt, unterstützt uns doch auf Patreon. Dann kommt ihr auch in den Genuss verschiedener Vorteile, wie zum Beispiel Zugang zu unserer Discord-Community oder Zugang zu den ultrageheimen Patreon-Episoden, die wir dort posten. Außerdem könnt ihr uns natürlich auch über PayPal Spenden zukommen lassen.
Außerdem haben wir mittlerweile einen eigenen Online-Shop. Das heißt, wenn ihr euch immer noch fragt, was ihr euren Lieben zu Weihnachten, Ostern oder sonst wie schenken könnt, geht dorthin und kauft duftes Merch.
Alle Links dazu hier in der Beschreibung oder auch auf unserer Webseite 99zu1.de.
Vielen Dank fürs Dabeisein, danke für die Unterstützung und wir sehen uns in diesem Theater.